And right now, I would like to introduce our speaker. This person has been a part of this church since he was 3 years old. He recognizes the voice of God, and he walks in his ways passionately. I am a witness to this. And I would just like y'all to welcome my son, Josh Poland.
Thanks. I didn't know you were such a jerk. He's a loyal Channel 4 watcher, apparently. Well, as many of you know that I'm the guy that's up here occasionally with my guitar leading you folks in worship on Sundays, and I'm so thankful for that privilege and that opportunity. As others of you know, I'm the guy from TV. I work at 10 TV as a meteorologist and reporter, and I gotta say, I have some fun at my job. I like working in television. And it's a job, just like any other job, except my job is on display for potentially hundreds of thousands of people to see. And I get some criticism as a result, and I get some strange comments from folks when they recognize me. I want to share a couple of those with you. I'll go out and somebody will recognize me from TV. Hey, aren't you the guy from TV? Oh, yeah, I guess so. They'll say, you're a lot shorter in person than you look on TV. So sorry to disappoint. The other thing I get a lot is this, and I never know how to respond to this one, but, you're a lot better looking in person than on TV. Thanks, I think. How do you respond to that one? But I do like working in television. I like using cameras, so I thought it would be appropriate for my sermon to include a video, so I got my brothers and my sister-in-law to help me make a video to show you what the typical Christian life is like.
Meet Jim. Jim recently gave his life to Jesus, and since then, life hasn't been better. Isn't that right, Jim? Christian living has given Jim promotions at work, a healthy bank account, and a deep respect from coworkers and friends. And it doesn't stop there, right, Jim? His marriage is picture perfect. You'll never see this couple quarreling. Jim's children are now little angels. They receive high marks on their report cards and never need a doctor visit. Yes, life is good for Jim, and it can be for you too. Become a Christian today.
Now, in case you were wondering, yes, my brother Jesse is as dorky as he looks in that video. But if it only were that easy, sadly, many Christians believe that they give their life to Christ, and that's exactly how it's going to be. A life without any pain, a life without any sorrow. You give your life to Christ, and suddenly everything's picture perfect. You don't argue with your wife anymore. Your little rascals are perfect angels. Never need a doctor visit. You got money coming in out the wazoo. But no, that's not the way it is. I would venture to say that just about everyone in this room knows that a life following Christ isn't always picture perfect. We're beginning a new sermon series today called 7 Lies People Believe About God, and the focus today is on the lie that many Christians believe, that God would never let his children suffer. Since we know that suffering is a part of life, even the Christian life, I want to call today's sermon Surviving the Storms of Life. Something that hits home with me as a meteorologist. Now, we know from last month's storms, back on June 29th, those storms that knocked out power for what seemed like eternity, we were forced to have church outside. We know from those storms that storms can produce destruction and devastation, and it's very similar to the storms of life. You see someone going through a storm of life, and you see the devastation that they're experiencing. You see what appears to be a damaged life. But the good news is that God is there to walk us through the storm. God is there after the storm to help us pick up the pieces, to help us rebuild. He wants to be part of that process, and if we allow him to be part of that process, we're going to end up with a life that's stronger and more solid than before those storms even hit. Now, as we think about that statement, we're left with 2 major questions. 1, why does God allow these storms in the first place? And 2, how are we able to survive these storms? Well, to find these answers, we need to dig deep into God's Word. But before we do, let's lift up our Bibles, electronic or paper, and let's read this month's verse. It comes out of 1 Timothy 4:13 and 15. Let's read it together. Until I get there, focus on reading the scriptures to the church, encouraging the believers, and teaching them. Give your complete attention to these matters. Throw yourself into your tasks so that everyone will see your progress. Let's pray this morning. Father God, I thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to your people this morning. Holy Spirit, I pray that you would just speak through me. I pray that these words would be yours and not mine. I pray that you would just soften our hearts to hear what you would tell us. I offer up this service to you in Jesus' name, amen. An old man visits his doctor for a routine checkup. After a thorough examination, the doctor says, okay, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. Which do you want first? The old man says, I'll take the bad news first. The doctor says, okay, you've got cancer. I give you 3 years to live. The old man says, that's horrible news. What could you tell me that could possibly outweigh what you just said? What kind of good news can you give me after that? Well, the doctor says, you also have Alzheimer's and you'll forget everything I told you in the next 3 months. We all want good news. Nobody ever wants the bad news. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And it brings us back to the question, why? Well, the question why takes us to the very beginning of the Bible in the book of Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve, the story of creation. It's a story that most of us are familiar with. And before we read out of Genesis, we must remember that we serve a perfect God who from the onset created a perfect universe without blemish, without sin, without anything bad. At the conclusion of creation, the Bible says in Genesis 1:31, and God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. But we know that things did not stay very good. Adam and Eve chose to disobey God. They chose to sin. They chose to eat from the one tree that God said was off limits to them. As a result, they brought sin into the world. They brought pain and suffering into the world, and a perfect world became imperfect. Genesis 3:16 through 19 shows us what the consequences of their actions were. Then God said to the woman, you will bear children with intense pain and suffering, and though your desire will be for your husband, he will be your master. And to Adam he said, because you listened to your wife and ate the fruit I told you not to eat, I have placed a curse on the ground. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. It will grow thorns and thistles for you. Though you will eat of its grains, all your life you will sweat to produce food until your dying day. Now, there's a professor of philosophy at Boston College. His name is Peter Kreeft, and he puts it this way. Once God chose to create human beings with free will, then it was up to them, rather than to God, as to whether there was sin or not. That's what free will means. Built into the situation of God deciding to create human beings is the chance of evil, and consequently, the suffering that results. He created the possibility of evil. People actualize that potential. The source of evil is not God's power, but mankind's freedom. You see, God easily could have created a race of human being puppets. We could have done whatever God wanted us to do. He could have controlled us like marionettes with a string. But God didn't want it that way. He wanted to give us free will. He wanted to give us the choice between good and evil, the choice between right and wrong, the choice to serve him or reject him. Adam and Eve chose to reject God, and as a result, they and all future generations of human beings were forced to live in a sin-cursed world. It's a world that brings us the storms of life. Now, as a meteorologist, I'm trained to track all types of storms, but I really believe that there are two types of storms that we really can relate to our storms here in life. Those are organized storms and pop-up storms. First, we'll talk about the organized storms. Now, organized storms are storms that we can see coming days in advance. We can track them hundreds of miles away. It could be like a hurricane out in the Atlantic, headed towards the eastern coast. We see it days in advance. It can be an area of low pressure that develops around the Rocky Mountains and is going to be headed towards Ohio. We see that days in advance, hundreds of miles away. And I would compare those types of storms to the storms of life that just about anybody can see coming. Now, these types of storms are usually associated with sin or wrongdoing and the correction and discipline that follows. For example, you're having an affair, you're cheating on your spouse. Likely, you're going to encounter a storm that includes some intense fighting, divorce proceedings, custody battles, legal battles, all kinds of pain and suffering. Anybody can see that storm coming. Another example, you're stealing from your employer. You're likely going to face a storm that includes one, being fired, and two, the possibility of jail time. Those are storms that people can see coming days in advance. The other type of storm is a pop-up storm. Now, these are the types of storms that we usually encounter this time of the year. These are the storms that seem to unexpectedly just pop up out of the middle of nowhere. You have moisture in the ground, the sun heats it up, forms into clouds, we see thunder clouds, then we see some thunderstorms in the afternoon and evening. Now, as meteorologists, we can't tell you exactly when or where. If I could, I'd be a rich man, so if anybody has the secret, let me know. But we can't always predict when and where, we just know that there's a likelihood of that. And I would say that these types of storms are the storms that most of us encounter in life. They're storms that unexpectedly come out of nowhere. And unlike the other type of storm, this type of storm is not the direct result of our own sin and wrongdoing, and we're not being disciplined. For example, just like that joke I told you, you go into your doctor's office and the doctor tells you you have cancer. That's a storm you didn't see coming. Another example, you get that call that no parent wants to get in the middle of the night that your son or daughter was involved in a car accident. That's a storm you didn't see coming. You go into work just like any other day, but this day the boss brings you into his office and tells you you're being laid off. Suddenly you're facing a storm of life, and you didn't see that one coming. It happens to each and every one of us, and when it does, we begin to ask the question, why? Now, as Christians, we know the ultimate answer to that question. We just told you it's back in the Garden of Eden with sin entering the world. But somehow it doesn't make sense. We're Christians, right? We start to cry out to God, God, I read my Bible every day. I pray every day. I'm involved in a small group. I go to church every single week. I even give you 10% of my income through tithing, and this is how you thank me? If there's anybody in this room that can honestly say they've gone through a storm of life without asking that type of question, I want to shake your hand because I think you're a better person than I am. All of us go through storms, and we all have questions. I believe there are 3 reasons why God permits the storms of life. Now, God isn't limited to these 3 reasons, but I think there are really 3 major reasons that He allows these storms in our life. 1, to discipline and correct us. 2, to grow our character. And 3, to show that He is ultimately in control. Let's talk about the storms that discipline and correct. Proverbs 3, verse 12 says, "For the Lord corrects those He loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights." The book of Hebrews, chapter 12, takes it a step further. In verse 11 says, "No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. But afterward, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way." Turn with me to the book of Jonah, chapter 1. We're going to get things started in verse 4. Now, most of us have heard the story of Jonah being in the belly of a big fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Before he got into that belly, we read that he encountered his own personal storm that was the direct result of his own disobedience to God. You see, God had called Jonah to preach to the city of Nineveh, to warn them about their sin and to warn them about the destruction that was coming their way because of their sin and their wickedness. Jonah said, "Oh, you want me to go to Nineveh? Yeah, I'm going to go this way." And he went the exact opposite way. The Bible says he bought a ticket on a ship and tried to sail as far away as he could from the city of Nineveh. We pick things up in verse 4. "But as the ship was sailing along, suddenly the Lord flung a powerful wind over the sea, causing a violent storm that threatened to send them to the bottom. Fearing for their lives, the desperate sailors shouted to their gods for help and threw the cargo overboard to lighten the ship." Let's go down to verse 10. "Then Jonah told them that he was running away from the Lord. The sailors were terrified when they heard this. 'Oh, why did you do it?' they groaned." I love that. They don't even believe in God. They have their own gods, but he tells them he's running away from the Lord. "Oh, why did you do it?' And since the storm was getting worse all the time, they asked him, 'What should we do to you to stop this storm?' 'Throw me into the sea,' Jonah said, 'and it will become calm again, for I know that this terrible storm is all my fault.'" Verse 15. "Then the sailors picked Jonah up and threw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. Now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Now in this case, God used a storm to discipline Jonah. In the following chapter, you'll find the storm changed Jonah's heart, and Jonah followed God's commands to preach to the city of Nineveh. The storm did exactly what it was supposed to do. It corrected Jonah, got him back on the right path. But as we read there, it wasn't just Jonah who was changed by that storm. The sailors on the ship gave their lives to God as a result of the storm. We don't always know what God wants to do with our storms. We're always focused on ourselves, but God is always looking to bring good out of bad situations. It's not always us who are changed by those storms. It's other people as well. The second type of storm, storms that grow our character. Now, sometimes we're faced with storms of life that never seem to end. Years of battling cancer, months of unemployment, months of separation from a spouse. And it's times like these when our patience is tested. But these storms can also grow our character. Turn to Genesis chapter 8. This is where we read about perhaps the most popular storm in the history of planet Earth. This is the storm that brought about Noah's flood. The Bible tells us that there was a storm that produced rain for 40 days and 40 nights, flooding the entire earth. We pick up the story of Noah after he and his family have been on the ark for 150 days, 5 months inside of an ark. Verse 1, but God remembered Noah and all the animals in the boat. He sent a wind to blow across the waters, and the floods began to disappear. Now, you would think that after 5 months on the ark, maybe God would feel bad for Noah and his family and miraculously allow all of the waters, all of the flood waters, just to dry up instantly. But no, we go on to read that it took another 5.5 months for that water to start drying up. Go to verse 13. Finally, when Noah was 601 years old, 10.5 months after the flood began, 10.5 months on that ark, Noah lifted back the cover to look. The water was drying up. 2 more months went by, and at last the earth was dry. Then God said to Noah, leave the boat, all of you. By the time all was said and done, Noah and his family spent more than a year inside that ark. Now, I bet Noah and his family were wondering, what the heck is going on outside these walls? We felt the ark moving on the waves. Suddenly, the ark stops. We're resting. Now we're sitting here for months. What's going on, God? Why aren't we leaving the ark? Little did they know what was going on behind the scenes. Now, if they had left the ark any sooner than God's appointed time, they would have experienced an earth that was too wet for survival. They likely would have died. God had a specific time for them to leave that ark and to start a new life. I believe that God wanted to test their character through this. I believe God wanted them to develop patience and trust in Him. Hebrews 10:35-36 says this, so do not throw away the confident trust in the Lord. Remember the great reward it brings you. Patient endurance is what you need now so that you will continue to do God's will. Then you will receive all that He has promised. Our final type of storm is a storm that shows that God is in control. He is the one ultimately in control in the midst of our storm. Turn with me to the book of Mark, chapter 4. We're going to start in verse 35. Now, the Gospels give us at least several accounts of Jesus calming a storm, and we're going to read about one of those accounts here, starting in verse 35. As evening came, Jesus said to His disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. He was already in the boat, so they started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm arose. High waves began to break into the boat until it was nearly full of water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. Frantically, they woke him up, shouting, Teacher, don't you even care that we are going to drown? When he woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the water, Quiet down. Suddenly, the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. And he asked them, Why are you so afraid? Do you still not have faith in me? And they were filled with awe and said among themselves, Who is this man that even the wind and waves obey him? Teacher, don't you care that we are going to drown? Does that sound familiar to anybody here in this room? Lord, don't you care that I'm out of work and the bills are piling up? Lord, don't you care that my loved one has just been given months to live? Don't you care? If we listen closely, we can hear God speaking to us exactly what Jesus said to His disciples. Why are you so afraid? Do you still not have faith in me? So we put our faith in Him. We put our trust in Him. And maybe the end result isn't what we were picturing. It isn't what we had in mind. But He's faithful. He brings us peace. He stops the wind. He stops the rain. Suddenly, there's a great calm in our lives. When we encounter storms, we can trust him to give us a peace that passes all understanding. We read about that peace in Philippians 4, verses 6 through 7. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all that he's done. If you do this, you will experience God's peace, which is far more wonderful than the human mind can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. In conclusion, when you're disciplined by God, be thankful. Thank him that he cares about you enough to send a storm your way to get you back on the right track, to become obedient to him. And don't be surprised if you see other people changed as the result of your storm. Just as we read with Jonah, that storm was sent to correct him, but the sailors gave their lives to God as a result. God always wants to bring good out of the bad. When you're facing a storm, be patient and trust in the Lord. Just like with Noah, God is working behind the scenes to prepare a better life for you than you even could have imagined. He just wants you to have patience and to trust in him. And remember, in the midst of your storm, that God is ultimately in control. He is the only one that can provide you with a peace that passes all understanding. Jesus never promised us a life without any trouble, a life without pain and without sorrow. In fact, he told us it was going to be the exact opposite. Jesus tells us in the book of John 16:33, "Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world." God came to earth in the form of Jesus to provide us an escape from a world cursed by sin. Because of Jesus' death and resurrection, we who believe in him have hope of a life one day without any pain, without any sorrow, no more storms of life. And I thank God for that. I was humbled and excited when Pastor Dave asked me to speak. He gave me a list of topics, and I knew exactly which one I was going to talk about. I told you I'm a meteorologist, so surviving the storms of life has special meaning to me, but I've also encountered my own storm of life. Some of you know, but many of you don't know this, but last month I had to say goodbye to my marriage. My wife left me 16 months ago, and it left me facing the biggest storm of my life. Now, I'm not here to point fingers at her or anything, because just like every successful marriage, every failed marriage is the result of two people. Whether the blame is split 50-50, 99% to one person, 1% or the other, it takes two people. So I'm not here to point fingers at her, because she could easily point fingers at me. But what I can tell you is that during my own personal storm of life, God revealed himself to me in ways that I never knew were possible. He gave me peace when I shouldn't have peace. He gave me joy when I shouldn't have joy. You know, there were many times that I was heading home from work, and I would just start crying uncontrollably, sobbing, and just wanting to drive my car off the side of the road. And it was times like those that I said, God, you got to be real. You got to be the God that I read about in the Bible. You got to give me that peace that passes all understanding. And he did. I'm sure many of you didn't know that I was up here going through that type of storm. He gave me joy. That's why I could be up here leading worship, smiling on TV, because he gave me that joy. He gave me the peace to get through this storm of life. A divorce isn't the way I wanted my storm to come to an end. I told you that storms oftentimes end in the way we didn't imagine that they would end. But I know that God has a plan for me through this. I never imagined that I'd be up here one day preaching a sermon, but I think this is just one example of the good that God is bringing out of a bad situation. The Bible says that he gives us comfort so that we could comfort others. God brought so many good men into my life to help me walk through my storm, and now he's starting to bring people into my life that I'm helping walk through their storms. He gives us comfort so we can comfort others. I know there are many people going through storms of life here today. I want you to know that if you trust in God, if you put your faith in him, if you have patience and trust him, he is going to get you through your storm. And he's going to give you comfort so that one day you can comfort others going through similar storms. God has also used this time in my life to reignite a passion for worshiping him. I told you I worship here Sunday mornings. And this entire sermon is based on scriptures that got me through my storm. I had to get into the Bible every single day. When you're going through a storm, in life in general, you need to be in the Word every day, but especially through a storm, you need to dig deep into the Bible. And the words of the scriptures that I shared with you today just jumped to me off the page. It was God's way of speaking to me, telling me, Josh, these promises aren't for people hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. These promises are for you today. I felt like God was telling me He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, that He's the God who was and is to come, that He's the God that will never leave us nor forsake us. So those scriptures that I read in the sermon, those were all scriptures that got me through, and they're scriptures that one day when I was worshiping on my own, I just started writing down and started worshiping God with that, and this song came out of it, and I hope that it touches you. The God who was and is to come. Lord, you are the God who was and is to come. Lord, you are never changing. Your promises, they will remain, never failing, forever, God, you stay the same. Fears turn into tears, Lord, you hear our prayers, you answer. Patience and with faith, on you, oh Lord, we wait with confidence. You are the God who was and is to come. Lord, you are the God who was and is to come. Lord, you are always faithful. You heal us and restore our strength. Forever loving when all else is gone. Still your love will stay. Fears turn into tears. Lord, you hear our prayers. You answer with patience and with faith. On you, oh Lord, we wait with confidence. You are the God who was and is to come. Lord, you are the God who was and is to come. Lord, you are for yesterday, today, the same. Forever, God, you never change. Forever, God, you stay the same. Forever, God, you never change. Yesterday, today, the same. Forever, God, you never change. Forever, God, you stay the same. Forever, God, you never change. Forever, you are. Forever, you'll be. Forever, my God. Forever, for me. God who was and is to come. Lord, you are the God who was and is to come. Lord, you are. I'd just like to ask anybody who's going through a storm right now to just stand up where you are. It could be any type of storm. But I know there are people right now going through a storm of life. I would just ask you to take that courage and stand up this morning. A lot of people. I'd like you folks to sing that chorus with me. And as they do, I just would ask the people around them just to extend your hand to them and pray with them this morning. Just pray for them. Sing, you are the God. You are the God who was and is to come. Lord, you are the God who was and is to come. Lord, you are the God who was and is to come. Lord, you are the God who was and is to come. Lord, you are. Lord God, I thank you for the courage that these people displayed by standing up this morning. I pray that you would give them that peace that passes all understanding. Give them that strength, Lord God. Make yourself real to them. God said, draw near to me and I will draw near to you. Lord, I pray that you give them that patience, that endurance, that faith to just keep trusting you. Bring people into their lives, Lord God, that would comfort them. I pray that you'd give them that comfort so that one day they would be able to comfort others. Thank you for what you're doing through us, Lord God. To you be all praise and honor and glory. Amen. Well, we want to open up the front for anybody that needs prayer. If I could have our prayer team up front. Every week we have people that want to pray with you. In this case in particular, if you are going through a storm of life and you feel like you want some additional prayer, we're up here to pray with you. If there's anybody out there that was listening to what we had to say today and wants to know more about Jesus, he is there with his arms open for us to run into his arms. He's there for us in the middle of our storms. Is there anybody here this morning that doesn't know Jesus and would like to have a personal relationship with Jesus? If you'd like to raise your hand this morning, we'd like to pray for you as well. Okay, let's go ahead and pray this morning. Father God, we thank you for everything that you do for us. We thank you that you are there, Lord, with arms wide open, that you're there to comfort us, that you're there to help us through our storms. You're there to help us pick up the pieces and rebuild. We thank you for who you are. We praise you, Lord. We give you all the glory. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. You're dismissed.